Hi everyone, Brenda Gustin here, and I am on section 1.1. We're in Introduction to Microbiology Part 1. And just a little bit about the structure of how I make these videos. I put the section number right here, and that's a number that corresponds to your textbook. And that number will also be in your lecture study guide. The headings here, when they're underlined, they have a section number and they're underlined. They're the exact same learning outcomes that are listed on your study guide. I'm looking over there because that's where my study guide is sitting. And so the idea is under this learning outcome, you should be able to define the things that I should be able to give you enough information that you can define the vocabulary and the concepts that are touched in these learning outcomes. So the first one here says, list the various types of microorganisms and identify which are cellular and which are acellular. So I think we have to back up a little bit and make sure that we understand a couple of vocabulary words. And first of all, microbiology. Microbiology is the study of living things too small to be seen with the microscope. Microbiology, the study of living things that are too small to be seen without a microscope. And you can imagine that that is a huge field. There are a lot of microbiologists that study a lot of different things. Microorganism is the living thing that's studied by microbiologists, so living things that are too small to be seen without a microscope. But there's also we have non-living what we still call kind of microorganisms, and a microbiologist would study. So we also have some acellular infectious agents that we would consider microorganisms. And so right now you might be thinking, like viruses, if you know that viruses are non-living. So a microorganism is a living organism too small to be seen with the microscope, or an acellular organism that's too small an infectious acellular organism that's too small to be seen with the microscope. And we would both consider those in the field of study those in the field of microbiology. So we're going to talk about the types of microorganisms, but I wanted to remind you of something here, just the difference between eukaryotic cells and prokaryotic cells. And hopefully you remember this. This course does have some prerequisites, so there's some things I'm hoping you remember before you get to this course, and this is one of them. But I put these pictures here, and they're in your textbook, that remind you, remember, eukaryotic cells are like human cells and plant cells and fungi and things like that, that these are the more complex cells. They tend to be larger than prokaryotic cells. These are the ones that have a nucleus and lots of organelles. Whereas the prokaryotic cells, in an introductory course, I'll say, when I say prokaryote, just think bacteria. But for you guys in a little more advanced course, we're going to have bacteria and archaea are the prokaryotic cells. So these are a little bit simpler. They don't have membrane-bound organelles. They don't have a nucleus. Oh, there we go. I put a picture there. I think we're going to look at this in lab, but these are some human cheek cells. And in the live lab, students scrape some cheek cells off their inside of their mouth, and you can see these two nice eukaryotic cells that came right from their own cheek. There's a nucleus with the chromosomes in it, but you also notice all these little dots, and these little dots are bacteria that are in the mouth of a healthy person. So these are prokaryotic cells. So the first thing you notice is the prokaryotic cells are a lot smaller than the eukaryotic cells. So here, the next learning outcome says, this is the same learning outcome. It says, list the various types of microorganisms and which are acellular, cellular, and acellular. I think if you remember this concept map, it helps out a lot. So I try to write it in the form of a concept map. When I have things in the PowerPoints that have these little arrows, that means they are questions that are in your study guide. So here's one of the questions in your study guide, and it says, draw a concept map. So you might want to stop this right now and see if you can do that, or follow along. So I'm going to start off with microorganisms. And if you think of the most general terms here, hopefully you would get to the terms cellular and acellular. So I'm going to get cellular and acellular. And so the different kinds of cells are the eukaryotic cells and the prokaryotic cells. So you can cross off your terms as you go along. The acellular organisms in this list are the viruses and the prions, and we will spend more time this semester talking about those and why they're different and important. The prokaryotes are the bacteria and the archaea. Now, I'm sure you've heard of bacteria. A lot of you have probably heard of archaea, but we're going to talk a little bit about those this semester. And then the eukaryotes are the protozoa, the fungi, and with the fungi, we have the molds and the yeast. And the yeast are the real true microscopic fungi. Remember, I don't have mushrooms in here because mushrooms aren't microorganisms. So try to do that. Try to be able to complete that concept map and commit it to memory. Okay, the next learning outcome says compare and contrast the relative sizes of different microorganisms and state the typical size of a bacterial cell in micrometers. So here's a picture right from your textbook, and it has the acellular microorganisms here, prions and viruses, and the cellular are either going to be prokaryotes, the bacteria and the archaea, or eukaryotes. And so in this picture, they're showing you that these gray circles is just a size comparison of these different entities. So if this is the size of a eukaryotic cell, they're saying it's about 10 micrometers. And this is the size of a bacterial cell. You can see that the bacteria is substantially smaller. In fact, that's about, on the average of 1 micrometer, about 10 times smaller. This is a number I want you to remember. 1 micrometer is the same thing as 1,000 nanometers, but I'll probably use the terms micrometers. And it's a good number to remember because it just gives you a perspective. So when you hear of another number, you think, oh, that's really big or that's really small compared to bacteria. So this is a number to remember. If a eukaryotic cell is about 100 micrometers, about 10 micrometers, a bacterial cell is about 1 micrometer. Viruses are about, so let's see, 100 nanometers is 0.1 micrometers. Again, 10 times smaller than bacteria. In fact, they're too small to see easily in our microscopes. And then prions are about 10 times smaller than that. And prions are just proteins. So we're going to talk about those later on, but they are the smallest out of these. The next outcome says draw a diagram of the 3 domains of life. And in that diagram, identify where eukaryotes, prokaryotes, and microorganisms are located. So this is a diagram of how organisms are classified. It's not just a concept map to remember, but this is actually the most widely accepted idea of how organisms evolved on this planet. So here they're saying is there's some common ancestor, some organism that led to all the other organisms. And that organism evolved and changed over time. And what we end up with is we end up with 3 main groups of organisms called 3 domains. And so you can see at this first branch, we went and bacteria evolved. And in fact, bacteria and archaea are the first organisms to evolve. Eukaryotes were later. But the bacteria are what we're going to spend most of the semester talking about, the prokaryotes. On this branch, we also have these archaea. And my best description of those right now is they're kind of extreme prokaryotes. They frequently live in extreme environments like high temperature or high salt, things like that. But the archaea are also prokaryotes, so all of these are microorganisms. And then over time, the eukaryotes branched out, and we put that in a domain called eukarya. And you'll notice some familiar organisms here, animals, fungi, plants. All these others are protozoa. So those are all eukaryotic organisms. So if we're trying to find the microorganisms, they're all here. But remember, some fungi are microscopic too. And these protozoa are microscopic. The animals and the plants do not have microscopic members. If they are microscopic, they're probably in one of these categories. So, oh, there's one of those little arrows. So that's showing you that this is a question in your lecture study guide. So in this list, which are prokaryotes, which are eukaryotes, and which are acellular? So think about that. Animals like us, eukaryotes. The archaea and the bacteria are both prokaryotes. Fungi, plants, protozoa, they're all eukaryotes. And viruses are acellular. So if you get your concept map down, you'll remember that, or you kind of look at those 3 domains of life. Explain the theory of evolution and why is it called a theory? First of all, evolution is the accumulation of changes that occur in organisms as they adapt to their environments. Remember when we looked at this 3 domains of life, I said we had this common ancestor, but something changed, and this was over billions of years, where organisms went from very simple bacteria, and then a branch formed. We got archaea, we got eukaryotes, but over time, these different organisms evolved. There were lots of genetic changes that allowed the organisms to adapt to unique environments. So this 3-domain system is really a model of what we know about evolution now, and as far as how one organism changed and led to the development of other organisms. So evolution, the accumulation of changes that occur in organisms as they adapt to their environments over long periods of time and generally. And so when we talk about the theory of evolution, evolution is driven by natural selection. And I think you're familiar with this idea of how natural selection is survival of the fittest. And we're going to talk about that again later on in the semester. But really the word I wanted you to center on here is theory, because some people say, oh, well, this isn't a big deal because it's only a theory. Remember, in science, a theory are strongly supported ideas. These are ideas that have had many, many experiments and broad support for them. So a theory in science is a big deal. It's something that's very hard to, or has been very well supported. We can't prove something to be right because we weren't here and watched this happen. So we have to use data, and we use our best information that we have, and so that's why we call it a theory instead of a fact, because we didn't watch evolution happen. So we have theory of evolution, and here's showing you in your book just a diagram talking about that, how the origin of the Earth, and then we went for about 1.5 billion years for that common ancestor. And then that evolution allowed the formation of bacteria, archaea, and the eukaryotes. And then evolution continued, and we've gotten lots of changes and new organisms deriving from these more primitive ones. So one of the things to notice is that bacteria and archaea have been on the planet much longer than the eukaryotes. We're still in section 1.1. And I want to state some positive ways microorganisms shape our planet. And there's lots of things. Your book has some things. I just picked out my favorite. Some microorganisms are photosynthetic, some protists and some bacteria. Not all of them. But remember, the photosynthetic organisms are the ones that use carbon dioxide for energy and produce oxygen. And so the photosynthetic microorganisms produce most of the oxygen on the planet. I've heard numbers around 70%. So most of these organisms are living in bodies of water, particularly the ocean. So the health of our oceans is really critical to the production of oxygen. Microorganisms can be the foundation of food webs. We all are used to that concept of, the smaller organisms are eaten by larger and larger and larger organisms. And so microorganisms are the foundational foods for a lot of organisms. Microorganisms are important in decomposition. If we did not have microorganisms, we would be miles and miles of high in leaves on this planet. Now, I could argue pretty easily that we probably wouldn't even be here without microorganisms. But let's say, we didn't have the decomposers to decompose leaves. Microorganisms are the critical organisms that are decomposing organic matter and cycling it in so other organisms can use it. One of the big things, and we're going to talk about this multiple times this semester, is how microorganisms associate with multicellular organisms like us, like plants, and all animals, and they benefit these organisms. We've spent so much time in our lives, being worried about microorganisms and are we going to have diseases and what's going to infect us and is food spoiling and all that. But we're learning more and more of all the benefits that microorganisms give to us. So there's a lot of those, and I'm going to try to help you understand that better this semester. And finally, I just put in fermentation, producing food and industrial products. We've been able to make things like cheeses and wines and different fermented products, sourdough bread, things like that. And we've used microorganisms to our benefits to make food and other industrial products. But you can't help but think of ways microorganisms cause harm. And so you want to get that word pathogen in your vocabulary. Pathogens are the microorganisms that cause infectious diseases. Now, we can have all sorts of diseases. You can have diabetes, but that's not typically caused by microorganisms infecting you. So pathogens are microorganisms that can actually grow in and on your body and cause what we call infectious diseases, diseases caused by pathogens. Here's a couple tables that are in your textbook. This is the top causes of death in the United States. And you can see here's the numbers. Heart disease, cancer, accidents. But down here about number 8, influenza and pneumonia. That's probably the most critical infectious diseases we have as far as death rates. If you look worldwide, you can see that those lower respiratory diseases like influenza and pneumonia are a little bit higher in rank. But also, worldwide, diarrhea and tuberculosis are important infectious diseases. And we'll touch on both of those this semester. So we're going to be kind of talking about all sorts of different pathogens. Other ways microorganisms can cause harm is they can spoil food and other products. So decomposition can be a good thing or it can be a bad thing. I have it on here. Microorganisms have positive and negative impacts on human health. So there's certain microorganisms we want associated with our bodies, and there's others that cause diseases. So, and sometimes they're the same ones. So that can be really confusing too. And this is something that's going to come up a lot this semester. I'm going to end section 1.1 right there.